I need to tell you about something that happened in 1781. Something so monstrous, so calculated in its cruelty, that when the story finally came to light, it shook the foundations of an entire empire. This is the story of the Zong, a slave ship, whose name would become synonymous with one of the most horrific atrocities of the Atlantic slave trade. Picture this. It's September 1781, and the Zong sets sail from Accra on the Gold Coast of Africa. She's a former Dutch slave ship, recently acquired by a Liverpool shipping syndicate. Her captain is a man named Luke Collingwood, a former ship's surgeon with no experience commanding a slave vessel. Remember that name. Luke Collingwood. He'll haunt your dreams as he's haunted mine. The ship is loaded. 440 enslaved Africans are packed into her hold. 440 human beings, stolen from their homes, chained in darkness, lying in their own filth. The ship is overcrowded, dangerously so. She was built to carry at most 193 people in those hellish conditions. But profit trumps humanity every time in this business, doesn't it? The crew numbers 17 white men to control 440 desperate souls. The ship is owned by a syndicate led by a man named William Gregson, a prominent Liverpool merchant. The ship itself is insured by a group of underwriters for up to £30 per enslaved person. £30. That's what a human life is worth in their ledgers. Now let me take you aboard. Let me make you smell the stench of human suffering, hear the cries, feel the oppressive heat of bodies pressed together in the dark. The middle passage, they called it. Middle, as if it were just another leg of a journey, as if it weren't a descent into hell itself. The hold of the Zong is barely 5 feet high. Imagine that. 5 feet. The enslaved Africans cannot stand. They lie on wooden shelves, packed so tightly that they cannot turn over without disturbing their neighbors. The heat is suffocating. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, blood, vomit, and human waste. There are no toilets, no privacy, no dignity. Children cry for their mothers. Mothers wail for children who were torn from their arms on the African coast. Men rattle their chains in futile rage. The strong try to help the weak, sharing what little water they're given, whispering words of comfort in languages that span a dozen different African peoples. Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, Fante. These people have nothing in common except their suffering and the color of their skin that marked them as cargo in European eyes. Captain Collingwood stands on deck as they leave the African coast behind. He's a tall man, thin, with the look of someone who's seen too much sun and drunk too much rum. His hands shake slightly. Maybe it's the malaria that's already beginning to course through his veins. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's the weight of what he's about to do, though I doubt he has that much conscience. His first mate, James Kelsall, approaches him. Kelsall is younger, harder, with eyes like chips of ice. He's done this before, sailed the Middle Passage 3 times already. He knows what to expect. "Captain, the cargo is secured," Kelsall says. He doesn't say people, he says cargo. That's the first step in this horror. You dehumanize them. You make them things, not people. It's easier that way. Easier to ignore the screams, easier to throw food into the hold like you're feeding animals, easier to watch them die and feel nothing. "How many did we lose during the loading?" Collingwood asks. This is normal. They always lose some during the loading, during the branding, during the initial shock of capture and imprisonment. 7 died. 3 more won't last the week, Kelsall reports, checking his ledger. But we have 440 alive and accounted for. Accounted for, Collingwood repeats, looking out at the endless Atlantic. Yes, we must account for everything, mustn't we? The owners will want a full accounting. William Gregson and his partners have invested heavily in this voyage. The ship cost money. The supplies cost money. The crew must be paid. And the enslaved Africans themselves, purchased from African traders on the coast, represent the bulk of the investment. Each one cost an average of £14 on the African coast. They expect to sell them for at least £40 each in Jamaica, maybe more if they arrive in good condition. That's the business model. Buy low, sell high. Never mind that the goods are human beings. The voyage to Jamaica should take about 2 months if the winds are favourable. But the winds are not favourable. Nothing about this voyage will be favorable. The first week passes in a kind of hellish routine. Every morning the enslaved Africans are brought up on deck in small groups, still chained, to be exercised. This means they're forced to jump and dance while the crew plays fiddles or beats drums. It's grotesque, obscene. They're starving, terrified, grief-stricken, and they're being forced to dance. Those who refuse are whipped until they comply. A young sailor named Thomas, barely 17, watches this daily ritual with growing horror. This is his first voyage on a slave ship. He needed the work. His family is poor, his father a dock worker who died in an accident, his mother struggling to feed 3 younger children. Thomas thought he was being brave, signing on to this ship. He thought he was being a man, providing for his family. Now he's not sure what he is. "You'll get used to it," an older sailor tells him. His name is Robert Stubbs, weathered and scarred from 20 years at sea. Everyone does. First voyage is always hard, but you learn not to see them as people. You learn to think of them as cattle. Makes it easier. Does it? Thomas asks quietly. Has to, Stubbs says, but there's something in his eyes that suggests it doesn't, not really, not ever. Below deck, in that suffocating darkness, the enslaved Africans are developing their own social structures, their own ways of surviving. A young woman named Ama, though no one aboard the Zong knows her name or cares to know it, has taken it upon herself to care for the children near her. She's only 20 herself, taken from her village 3 months ago, marched to the coast in a slave coffle, sold to European traders for the price of some rum and a few bolts of cloth. Ama had a child once, a daughter, 2 years old when Ama was captured. The child was deemed too young to survive the voyage, so she was left behind. Ama doesn't know if her daughter is alive or dead. She doesn't know if her mother, who was with the child when the raiders came, survived. She doesn't know anything except that she's here, in this darkness, and there are children crying. She sings to them softly. Old songs her mother taught her, songs about the river and the forest and the spirits that watch over children. The children don't all speak her language, but they understand the tone, the comfort in her voice. They press close to her, as close as the chains will allow, and some of them stop crying. There's a man nearby, older, maybe 40. His name is Kofi, though again, no one aboard the Zong knows this. Kofi was a trader himself, a man of some wealth and standing in his community. He spoke Portuguese, traded with the European forts on the coast. He thought that made him safe. He was wrong. Debts, accusations, tribal politics, it all combined to see him sold into slavery, his protests in Portuguese ignored by men who simply didn't care. Kofi has been trying to learn the layout of the ship, trying to understand the routines, trying to find some weakness, some chance for escape or rebellion. But what can you do when you're chained in the dark, when the only time you see daylight is when you're surrounded by armed men, when you're outnumbered and weakened by hunger and disease? We have to do something, he whispers in Akan to those near him who understand. We cannot simply accept this. What can we do? Another man responds. His name is Kwame, a farmer, a father of 6. They have guns, we have chains. Then we die fighting, Kofi says. Better that than die in chains like animals. And the children? Ama speaks up. If we fight and fail, they will kill the children too. I have seen how these men are. They would kill everyone as a warning to others. This conversation, or variations of it, is happening throughout the hold. Some want to fight, to rebel, to take their chances with death over slavery. Others want to survive, to hope that somehow, somewhere, there might be a better future. Still others have simply given up, lying motionless in the dark, waiting for death to claim them. 3 weeks in, and already the situation aboard the Zong is deteriorating. The water supply is running low. The ship has missed Jamaica, blown off course by contrary winds and Collingwood's inexperience with navigation. They've sailed too far north toward Hispaniola, and now they're trying to correct course. Collingwood is in his cabin, studying the charts, his hands shaking with fever. He's been sick for days now, the malaria burning through him, but he's trying to hide it from the crew. A captain cannot show weakness. A captain must always appear in control, even when he's lost, even when he's dying. Kelsall enters without knocking. Captain, We need to discuss the water situation. Collingwood looks up, his eyes unfocused. What about it? We're consuming more than we planned. The cargo is drinking more than we calculated, and with the course corrections we're looking at least 2 more weeks before we reach Jamaica, maybe 3. How much do we have left? At current consumption, about 10 days, maybe 12 if we ration strictly. Collingwood stares at the charts, but he's not seeing them. He's seeing his career ending in disgrace, seeing the owner's fury when he arrives in Jamaica with half the cargo dead, seeing himself blacklisted from ever captaining a ship again. We need to reduce consumption, he says finally. We're already rationing the cargo's water, Kelsall points out. We could reduce it further, but many are already dying from dehydration. Then let them die faster, Collingwood says harshly. The ones who are sick, the ones who aren't going to survive anyway, cut their water entirely. No point wasting resources on those who won't make it. Kelsall nods slowly. This is brutal, but it's within the normal range of brutality for a slave ship. I'll see to it. But reducing water rations doesn't solve the problem. Over the next few days, more enslaved Africans die. The diseases spreading through the hold, dysentery and smallpox primarily, are claiming lives daily. Bodies are thrown overboard every morning, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time, wrapped in old canvas or simply tossed naked into the sea. Thomas, young Thomas, who's trying so hard not to see them as people, is on body disposal duty one morning. He and another sailor go down into the hold to collect the dead. The smell makes him retch, even though he's been living with it for weeks now. They find an old woman dead in her chains, her eyes still open, staring at nothing. They find a child, maybe 8 years old, curled up as if sleeping. They find a young man who looks like he should have decades of life ahead of him, dead from disease and despair. As they're unchaining the old woman, the man next to her, still alive, speaks. He's speaking in English, broken and heavily accented, but English. She tell me, he says, his voice rasping. She tell me to say, she had 3 children. 3 children. She want someone to know. She exist. She was mother. She had name. Thomas stares at him. What was her name? Abina, the man says. She was Abina. She was person, not cargo, person. Thomas and the other sailor carry the bodies up on deck. The morning sun is harsh after the darkness of the hold. They take the bodies to the rail and prepare to throw them over. Wait, Thomas says. He's crying, tears streaming down his face, and he doesn't even realize it. Wait. Her name was Abina. She was a mother. She had 3 children. Someone should say that. Someone should acknowledge it. The other sailor, a hard man named Jim who's been at sea for 15 years, looks at him with something like pity. Boy, you can't think like that. You can't. There's 440 of them down there. You going to learn all their names. You going to mourn each one. You'll go mad. You have to stop thinking of them as people. But they are people, Thomas says. That's the whole problem, isn't it? They're people and we're treating them like cargo. We're treating them like what they are, Jim says firmly. Cargo, property. That's what the law says. That's what the owners say. That's what the captain says. And we're just sailors following orders. Now throw her over, and let's get the others. They throw Abina into the sea. Her body makes a small splash and then disappears beneath the waves. No ceremony, no prayer, no marker to show that a woman named Abina, a mother of 3 children, once existed. Thomas throws up over the rail. Jim pats him on the back without sympathy. First voyage is always the hardest. You'll toughen up. But Thomas isn't sure he wants to toughen up. He's starting to realize what toughening up means. It means killing the part of yourself that feels empathy, that recognizes the humanity in others. It means becoming something less than human yourself. Down below, Amma is caring for a sick child. The girl, maybe 6 years old, is burning with fever, her skin hot to the touch, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Amma has nothing to treat her with, no medicine, no clean water, nothing but whispered words and a hand to hold. The child's mother is chained nearby, too weak from her own illness to reach her daughter. She's crying silently, helplessly, watching her child die inches away from her. Sing for her, the mother whispers to Amma. Please, sing so she doesn't die in silence. Amma sings. She sings the songs her mother taught her, songs about the ancestors watching over them, songs about green fields and cool rivers, songs about home. The child's breathing slows, becomes more peaceful. And then it stops. The mother's scream is a sound that will haunt Amma for the rest of her life, however long that might be. It's not a human sound, it's the sound of something breaking, of a soul shattering. Every person in the hold hears it and understands it. They've all lost someone, they're all losing themselves. By early November, the situation on the Zong is becoming critical. They've been at sea for over 2 months now. The water situation is dire. The death toll among the enslaved Africans is climbing, and Collingwood's fever is getting worse. Kelsall comes to him again. Captain, we need to make a decision about the water. Collingwood is lying in his bunk, too weak to stand. His face is grey, his eyes sunken, but his mind, fever-addled as it is still calculating. How many are left, he asks. Of the cargo? About 380. We've lost 60 so far. And how many of those are sick? Unlikely to survive? Kelsall consults his notes. At least 100 are showing symptoms of dysentery or smallpox. Maybe 50 more are severely weakened. They're consuming water but unlikely to survive to sail. Collingwood stares at the ceiling of his cabin. His mind is racing, fever dreams mixing with cold calculation. He's thinking about the insurance policy. He's thinking about maritime law. He's thinking about a case he once heard about years ago where a ship's captain had thrown cargo overboard in a storm and the insurers had to pay for the loss. There's a precedent, he says slowly. The law is clear on this. If cargo must be jettisoned to save the ship, the loss falls on the insurers, not the owners. Kelsall stares at him. Captain, are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we follow maritime law. We're in a crisis. We don't have enough water to get everyone to Jamaica alive. If we continue as we are, we'll lose the entire cargo, possibly the crew as well. But if we make the difficult decision, if we jettison the cargo that cannot be saved anyway, we can preserve the ship and the healthy cargo. You're talking about throwing living people overboard, Kelsall says flatly. I'm talking about jettison. Collingwood insists. Maritime law has covered this for centuries. When a ship is in danger, when cargo must be thrown overboard to save the ship, that's jettison, and the insurers pay. The sick Negroes are consuming water we cannot spare. They're going to die anyway. Better to jettison them now and save those who can be saved. Kelsall is quiet for a long moment. He's thinking about his own career, his own future. If they arrive in Jamaica with most of the cargo dead, he'll be blamed along with the captain. He'll never work in the trade again. But if they can claim it was necessary jettison, if they can shift the loss to the insurers, then maybe he can salvage something from this disaster. How many? He finally asks. Start with the sickest, the ones who are clearly dying, maybe 50, 60. We'll see how that affects our water supplies. Then we can decide if we need to do more. The crew won't like this. The crew will follow orders, Collingwood says sharply. They signed on for this voyage. They'll do their duty. But he's wrong about that. The crew is divided, torn between following orders and following their consciences. When Kelsall calls them together to explain what's going to happen, the reaction is immediate and angry. You want us to murder them? Robert Stubbs says, his voice rising. That's what you're asking, murder. It's not murder, Kelsall says firmly. It's jettison, it's legal. It's necessary to save the ship. It's murder dressed up in legal language. Stubbs insists, and I won't be part of it. Then you'll be charged with mutiny, Kelsall says coldly. The captain has given an order. You'll follow it or face the consequences. Young Thomas is standing at the back of the group, his face pale. There has to be another way. We could ration the water more strictly. We've already cut their rations to almost nothing, Kelsall interrupts. This is the only way. The captain has made his decision. Now we all have to live with it. But can they live with it? That's the question that will haunt these men for the rest of their lives. The first selection happens on November 29th. Kelsall and 2 other sailors go down into the hold to choose who will die. They bring lanterns casting flickering shadows on the rows of chained bodies. The sickest ones, Kelsall instructs. The ones who are clearly dying. The old, the weak, the children who won't survive anyway. They walk through the hold, examining the enslaved Africans like a farmer examining livestock. This one is too sick. That one is too weak. This child is dying of smallpox. That old man can barely breathe. Kofi, the trader who spoke Portuguese, realizes what's happening. He starts shouting first in Portuguese, then in Akan, warning the others. They're choosing who to kill. They're selecting people to throw overboard. Fight back. Don't let them take anyone. But what can they do? They're chained. They're weak from hunger and disease, and the sailors have clubs and knives. Ama is selected. She's been sick with fever for days, barely able to lift her head. She doesn't struggle as they unchain her from the hold. She's too weak. Or maybe she's accepted what's coming. Maybe some part of her welcomes it. An end to the suffering. The child she's been caring for, the little girl who reminds her of her own daughter, reaches out to her as she's taken away. Mama, the child cries, using the word that crosses all languages. Mama. 54 people are selected that day. 54 men, women, and children who are judged too sick, too weak, too close to death to be worth the water they're drinking. They're brought up on deck, blinking in the harsh sunlight, many too weak to stand without support. It's evening. The sun is setting over the endless Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. It's beautiful, obscenely beautiful given what's about to happen. The crew gathers on deck. Some of them look determined, resolved to do their duty. Others look sick, horrified at what they're being asked to do. Thomas is trembling, his hands shaking so badly he can barely hold the rope he's been given. Collingwood drags himself from his cabin to oversee the operation. He looks like a corpse himself, gaunt and grey, but his voice is steady as he addresses the crew. Men, what we do today is a matter of survival. The law is clear. This is jettison, not murder. We are saving the ship. We are saving those who can be saved. History will judge us by the survival of this voyage, not by the losses we suffered along the way. Do your duty. The first man brought forward is old, maybe 60, though it's hard to tell. Slavery ages people, makes them old before their time. He's sick with dysentery, barely conscious. 2 sailors lift him, one on each side. Please, Thomas whispers. Captain, please, there has to be another way. There is no other way, Collingwood says flatly. Do it. They carry the old man to the rail. He doesn't struggle. Maybe he doesn't understand what's happening. Maybe he's too sick to care. They lift him up and over. For a moment he seems to hang in the air, silhouetted against the setting sun. Then he falls. The splash is surprisingly small. The ocean swallows him without ceremony, without acknowledgement. In seconds there's nothing to show that a man just died there, nothing but ripples on the water that quickly fade. 53 more to go. Amma is 4th. When they grab her, when they start to drag her toward the rail, she suddenly seems to wake up, to realize fully what's happening. She starts to fight, struggling with what little strength she has left. No, she screams in her own language. No, I want to live. I want to see my daughter again. Please, please. But they don't understand her words, or they don't care. 3 sailors grab her, and she fights them every step, scratching, biting, kicking. One of them hits her across the face, stunning her, and they use that moment to lift her. She's screaming as they throw her over, screaming words that no one on the Zong understands but that everyone with a heart would recognize. She's calling for her mother. She's calling for her child. She's calling for mercy that will never come. She hits the water and goes under. For a moment she surfaces, still screaming, still fighting. Then the weight of her clothes, the weakness of her body, pulls her down, and she's gone. Thomas is sobbing now, openly crying, but he's still following orders. He's helping to bring the next person forward. And the next, because that's what you do when you're a sailor. You follow orders, even when those orders are to commit murder. A mother and child are brought forward together. The child is maybe 4 years old, sick with smallpox, her little body covered in sores. The mother is healthier, but she's clinging to her child, and the sailors don't bother to separate them. Together, one of the sailors says, "Throw them together." The mother is singing to her child as they're carried to the rail, a lullaby, soft and sweet, in a language the sailors don't understand. She's still singing as they go over the rail, still singing as they fall, still singing for a moment after they hit the water. Then the singing stops, and there's only the sound of the waves and the cries of the other prisoners watching from below deck, pressed against the grates, seeing their friends, their families, their children being murdered before their eyes. An old woman fights them. She's tiny, barely 5 feet tall, thin as a rail, but she fights with the strength of absolute terror. She bites one sailor's hand so hard she draws blood. She claws another's face, leaving deep scratches. It takes 5 men to subdue her, and even then she's screaming, a sound that's barely human, a sound of pure rage and terror. "Shut her up," one of the sailors shouts. They hit her repeatedly, trying to knock her unconscious, but she won't stop fighting, won't stop screaming. Finally, they just throw her over while she's still conscious, still fighting, still screaming her defiance at them. She's screaming all the way down. The scream cuts off when she hits the water, but somehow the echo of it seems to hang in the air, accusatory, damning. A young man, maybe 25, is brought forward. He's sick, yes, but not as sick as some of the others. He could potentially survive if given proper care, proper food, proper water. But he's been selected, and his fate is sealed. He looks at the sailors, at Collingwood, at Kelsall. He doesn't speak English, but his eyes speak volumes. They say, "I see you, I see what you are, I see your souls, and they are black as the deepest ocean. You will be judged for this, if not by men, then by God, if not by God, then by history. What you do today will follow you forever." Then he walks to the rail himself. He doesn't wait for them to throw him. He climbs up on the rail, balances there for a moment, and jumps. It's the only choice he has left, the only control he can exert over his own death. He chooses the moment. He chooses the manner. It's not much, but it's something. This continues through the night. 54 people. 54 souls. Some go quietly, too sick to resist. Others fight with everything they have. One man, strong despite his illness, manages to grab one of the sailors and nearly pulls him over the rail with him. It takes 4 men to separate them, and when they finally throw the enslaved man over, the sailor he grabbed is shaking, pale, staring at his hands, as if he can't quite believe what he's just done. A pregnant woman is brought up. She's perhaps 7 months along, her belly round with life even as she's dying of dysentery. She doesn't fight. She doesn't scream. She places her hands on her belly, feeling the life inside her, the child who will now never be born, never take a breath, never know anything but death. She starts to sing, a soft, mournful song in a language none of them understand. It's a lullaby, perhaps, or a prayer, or maybe just a goodbye. She's singing to her unborn child, telling it that she's sorry, so sorry, that she tried to protect it, that she wanted so badly for it to live. The sailors are crying now, most of them, even the hard ones, even the ones who've done this work for years, are crying as they lift this woman, this mother, this vessel of life, and carry her to the rail. She's still singing as they throw her over. The song continues as she falls, clear and pure and heartbreaking. It cuts off when she hits the water with horrible finality. The silence that follows is somehow worse than the screaming. By dawn, it's done. 54 bodies are in the ocean, 54 people are dead, and the crew of the Zong stands on deck, many of them unable to look each other in the eye, all of them marked by what they've just done. Thomas has vomited until there's nothing left in his stomach. He's lying on the deck, shaking, staring at nothing. Robert Stubbs is sitting with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Even Kelsall looks shaken, his usual cold composure cracked. Collingwood staggers back to his cabin. His fever is worse, burning through him, but he's still calculating, still planning. "Log it," he tells Kelsall. "Note the date, the number, the reason. We jettisoned 54 slaves due to water shortage. The ship was in danger. It was necessary for the survival of the vessel and the remaining cargo. Make sure it's all documented. The insurers will need to see everything. Kelsall nods mechanically and goes to write in the ship's log. His hand is shaking so badly that his writing is barely legible, but he writes it all down. 54 slaves jettisoned. Necessary for the safety of the ship. The loss falls on the insurers. Below deck, the remaining enslaved Africans are in shock. They heard everything. They saw some of it through the grates. They know that 54 of their number were just murdered. They know that any of them could be next. Kofi is organizing resistance. He's whispering to those around him, forming a plan. When they come down again, we fight. All of us. We may die, but we die fighting, not like animals being thrown to the sea. But one of the older women shakes her head. If we fight, they will kill us all, the children too. Better to survive, to hope. Maybe some of us will live to tell this story. Maybe someone will care. Who will care? Kofi asks bitterly. Who will care about the deaths of African slaves? We are not people to them. We are cargo. Our deaths will be noted in ledgers and nothing more. He's wrong about that, though he doesn't know it yet. People will care. The story of the Zong will be told and retold. It will become a rallying cry for abolition. But that's in the future. Right now, in this moment, on this ship, the horror continues. Because here's the thing that makes this story even more unbearable. The next morning, November 30th, it rains. Beautiful, blessed rain. The kind of torrential downpour that the Caribbean is famous for. The crew scrambles to collect it, setting out every container they have, opening the water barrels to fill them. Within hours, they have more water than they know what to do with. The crisis is over. The water shortage, the reason given for throwing 54 people overboard, no longer exists. Some of the crew dare to hope that the nightmare is over. They did what they thought they had to do, and now the situation is resolved. They can continue to Jamaica, sell the remaining cargo, and try to forget what happened. But they don't know Captain Collingwood. They don't understand the fever that's burning through his brain, the calculations that are driving him, the cold logic of profit and loss that has nothing to do with humanity. December 1st. The rain has stopped. The water barrels are full, and Collingwood calls his officers to his cabin. He looks worse than ever. The fever is eating him alive from the inside out. His skin is yellow with jaundice, his hands shake constantly, but his mind, twisted as it is still working. We'll continue with the jettison, he announces. There's a moment of stunned silence, then Kelsall speaks. Captain, we have water now. The rain filled our barrels. There's no longer a shortage. The selections were made before the rain, Collingwood says, his voice taking on a strange, dreamy quality. Based on the conditions at the time, we identified the cargo that was dying, that was consuming resources without hope of survival. Those conditions haven't changed. Those slaves are still dying. They're still costing us. We need to see this through. Captain, another officer, a man named William, speaks up carefully. I don't understand. The reason we gave for the first jettison was the water shortage. If there's no longer a shortage, how can we justify continuing? The same way we justified the first one, Collingwood says, his voice rising, taking on a manic edge. They're dying anyway. They're consuming resources. Food, space, air. They're spreading disease to the healthy cargo. Every day they remain alive is another day they could infect others, could cost us more losses. We see this through. We finish what we started. Captain, I must object, William says. This is no longer about survival. This is what? Collingwood interrupts. Murder, is that what you were going to say? Because if it's murder now, then it was murder yesterday. If you participated yesterday, you're already guilty. You think objecting now will absolve you. You think refusing today will make up for what you did yesterday. He's right, in a horrible way. The men who participated in the first jettison are already complicit. They've already crossed the line, and now Collingwood is using their guilt to manipulate them into crossing it again. We continue, Collingwood says firmly. 42 more. The next sickest. We do it today. The crew is divided. Some, like William and Robert Stubbs, refuse to participate again. They lock themselves in their quarters or find tasks on the other side of the ship, anything to avoid being part of this. But others, whether from fear of mutiny charges, or from a desperate need to justify what they've already done, or from simple obedience to authority, continue to follow orders. Young Thomas is among those who refuse. He goes down into the hold and sits among the enslaved Africans, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispers, even though they don't understand his language. "I'm so sorry. I helped yesterday. I helped murder your friends, your family. I don't know why. I don't know how I could do that. But I won't do it again. I won't." An old man, chained nearby, looks at him with eyes that have seen too much. He doesn't speak English, but he understands the tears, the remorse. He reaches out as far as his chains will allow and touches Thomas's hand. It's a gesture of forgiveness, maybe, or just acknowledgement. "We're all victims here," the gesture seems to say. "All of us are trapped in this horror." On deck, the second selection is underway. 42 more enslaved Africans are brought up. They know what's coming. The word has spread through the hold. When the sailors come for them, there's screaming, fighting, desperate resistance. One woman, chained next to her sister, grabs the chains and won't let go. The sailors beat her hands with clubs until she releases her grip. Her fingers broken and bleeding, they drag her sister away while she screams, and the sister screams back, both of them calling each other's names, names that will never be recorded, never be remembered. A young man, one of those Kofi has been organizing, lunges at a sailor as he's being unchained. He manages to get his hands around the sailor's throat before two others pull him off. They beat him unconscious and carry him to the rail, throwing him over while he's still alive but insensible. He hits the water and sinks without ever regaining consciousness, drowning in the dark. A child, maybe 10 years old, understands what's happening and begs in broken English, words he's picked up from the sailors. "Please, master. Please. I be good. I work hard. Please, no throw. Please." The sailor holding him is crying. But he still carries the child to the rail. He still throws him over. The child's scream as he falls is cut short by the water, and then there's just the sound of the waves and the wind and the crying of the other prisoners below. Among the 42 is the little girl that Arma had been caring for. She's weakened by disease, barely conscious, but she's alive. When they take her, Kofi, who's been chained near her, starts screaming. "She's a child. A child. What kind of monsters are you? What kind of men throw children into the sea?" Kelsol, supervising the operation, looks at him coldly. "We're men following orders. We're men doing what's necessary for survival." "Survival?" Kofi laughs. A harsh, bitter sound. "You have water. You have food. This isn't about survival. This is about money. You're killing us for insurance money." Kelsol's face goes white. How does this slave know about the insurance? Has he been listening to the crew's conversations? Does he speak English better than they thought? It doesn't matter. He can't be allowed to spread that idea. "Throw him over too," Kelsol orders. "He's trouble. He's organizing resistance. Get rid of him." "But he's healthy," one of the sailors objects. "He's not on the list. He's not sick." "I said throw him over," Kelsol snaps. "Consider it a disciplinary measure. We can't have rebels among the cargo. Do it now." They unchain Kofi and drag him to the rail. He doesn't fight. He stands tall, looks each of the sailors in the eye and speaks in clear, accented English. "I was a trader. I spoke your language. I did business with your people. I thought that made me different, made me safe. I was wrong, but hear me now. What you do today, what you have done, it will not be forgotten. Maybe not in your lifetime, maybe not in mine, but someday, someone will tell this story. Someday, the world will know what happened on this ship, and you will be judged. All of you, the captain, the crew, the owners, the insurers, all of you will be judged." Then he climbs up on the rail himself, balances there for a moment, and speaks one more time. "My name is Kofi Mensah. I was a man. I had a wife and 4 children. I had a life. Remember that. Remember that we were people." And he jumps. The sailors stand there, frozen, staring at the spot where he disappeared. His words hang in the air, accusatory, prophetic. They will be judged. But not today. Today, the killing continues. By the end of December 1st, 42 more bodies are in the ocean. 96 total. 96 people murdered in 2 days. That night, the crew is fractured. Some of them have withdrawn entirely, refusing to eat, refusing to speak, staring at nothing. Others are defensive, aggressive, insisting loudly that they were just following orders, that they did nothing wrong, that it was all legal and necessary. Thomas is still in the hold, sitting with the enslaved Africans. He's given them his water ration, his food. It's a small thing, meaningless really, in the face of what's been done, but it's all he can do. One of the women speaks to him in English. Her name is Afua, and she was a house slave for a Portuguese trader before being sold on to the Zong. She speaks English, Portuguese, and 3 African languages. "Why do you stay here with us?" she asks. "You are crew. You should be up there with them." "I can't," Thomas says. "I can't be among them. I can't pretend this is normal. I helped yesterday. I helped kill 54 people. I don't know how to live with that." "You live with it by remembering," Afua says quietly. "You live with it by telling the story when we're all dead, because we will be dead. All of us. We know this now. Even if they don't throw us overboard, we'll die from disease, from despair. But you might live, and if you live, you tell the story. You tell the world what happened on this ship. You make people know. That's how you live with it." "I'll tell," Thomas promises. "I swear to you, if I survive, I'll tell. Everyone will know. The world will know." Afua nods. "Then we are not dying for nothing. Then there is some purpose to this horror." But the horror isn't over. December 2nd dawns clear and beautiful, the ocean sparkling in the morning sun, seabirds circling the ship, crying their harsh cries. It's a beautiful day. It's a day that should be full of life and hope. Instead, it will see more death. Collingwood emerges from his cabin looking like death himself. The fever has progressed to the point where he should be bedridden, but he drags himself on deck through sheer force of will. 36 more, he announces to Kelsall. "Finish it today." "Captain," Kelsall says carefully, "the men are at their limit. Many are refusing orders. We're on the edge of mutiny here." "Then shoot the first man who mutinies," Collingwood says coldly. "We finish this today. I want the sickest 36 brought up and thrown over. We're done with this. We complete the jettison. We reach Jamaica. We sell the remaining cargo, and we collect from the insurers for those who were lost. That's the plan. That's what we're doing. Anyone who objects can join the cargo in the ocean." The crew is gathered. Collingwood, leaning against the mast for support, addresses them. "I know you're tired. I know this has been difficult, but we're almost done. 36 more, and we're finished with this business. Then it's straight to Jamaica, and we can all put this behind us." "Can we?" Robert Stubbs stands up. He's a big man, and when he speaks, people listen. "Can we really put this behind us?" "Captain, we've thrown 96 people overboard in 2 days. 96 human beings. Women, children, sick people, healthy people. We've murdered them, and you want us to just put it behind us?" "We jettisoned cargo," Collingwood corrects him. "Legally, properly, according to maritime law. The insurers will pay, the owners will be satisfied, and we'll all be paid for this voyage. That's how this works." "I don't want blood money," Stubbs says. "I don't want to be paid for murder." "Then don't take your wages," Collingwood says with a shrug. "Give them to charity, give them to the church. I don't care, but you'll still do your duty. 36 more, and we're done. Now, are you going to help, or are you going to stand there moralizing?" Stubbs looks around at the other men, hoping someone will support him, will stand with him, but they're all looking down, avoiding his eyes. They're tired, they're traumatized, they're broken, they just want it to be over. "I won't do it," Stubbs says finally. "I won't help. I'll take whatever punishment you want to give me, but I won't murder any more people." "Fine," Collingwood says. "Lock him below until we reach Jamaica. He can face charges then. Anyone else?" Thomas stands. "I won't do it either." "Lock them both up," Collingwood orders. "Anyone else want to join them? Good. Then let's finish this." The 36 are selected and brought up. By now, the pattern is established. The enslaved Africans know what's coming. Some fight, some go quietly, some curse in languages the sailors don't understand, some pray to gods the sailors have never heard of. But here's where something changes. Here's where the narrative shifts slightly, because 10 of the 36, 10 people who've been watching and waiting, who've been planning, make a decision. When they're brought on deck, when they see the rail and the ocean beyond, they break free from the sailors holding them and run for the rail themselves. Before anyone can stop them, they throw themselves overboard. 10 people, choosing their own deaths, choosing the moment, the manner, the meaning. They don't give the sailors the satisfaction of throwing them. They don't wait to be murdered. They choose. As they jump, several of them are shouting. Ifeur, who spoke to Thomas the night before, is among them. As she leaps, she shouts in English, loud enough for all the crew to hear. Remember the Zong. Remember our names. We are people. We are people. Remember the Zong. Her cry is taken up by the others as they jump, each in their own language. Remember us. Tell our story. We are people. We are people. The sailors stand frozen, watching these 10 people choose death over allowing their murderers to control even that. It's an act of defiance so powerful, so complete, that it breaks something in the crew. Several of them fall to their knees, sobbing. Others turn away, unable to watch. Collingwood, propped against the mast, watches with fevered eyes. 26 more, he says, his voice barely a whisper. Finish it. And they do. 26 more people are thrown overboard. 132 in total. Over 3 days. 132 murders disguised as jettison. 132 people whose only crime was the color of their skin. When it's finally done, when the last body has hit the water, the crew of the Zong stands on a deck that's clean of blood but stained with guilt. The sun is setting again, painting the sky in colors that seem to mock the horror of what's just happened. Collingwood staggers to his cabin and collapses on his bunk. He never gets up again. The fever takes him over the next few days, burning through him, leaving him delirious and raving. In his fever dreams, he sees them. All of them. 132 faces staring at him, accusing him, damning him. The Zong finally reaches Jamaica on December 22, 1781. Collingwood is already dead, his body committed to the same ocean that swallowed his victims. Of the 440 enslaved Africans who began the voyage, only 208 survived to be sold. More than half are dead. The survivors are broken. If Ewer's words were prophetic, most of them will die within months from disease, from despair, from the brutality of plantation slavery. Very few will live to old age. Very few will ever have the chance to tell their stories. But the story doesn't stay hidden. Because back in England, the ship's owners, William Gregson and his partners, file an insurance claim. They're seeking £30 per enslaved person for the 132 who were jettisoned. They want £3,960 for murder. The insurance underwriters, a group that includes a man named Thomas Gilbert, immediately smell something wrong. Ships lose enslaved people to disease all the time. It's one of the accepted horrors of the trade. But this, 132 people, all thrown overboard. They refuse to pay. The case goes to court, and this is where the story of the Zong begins to reach the world. March 6, 1783, more than a year after the massacre, the Court of King's Bench in London. The case is styled Gregson v. Gilbert, a civil case about insurance, not about murder. The courtroom is a grand space, all dark wood panelling and high ceilings, portraits of stern judges lining the walls. The gallery is packed with merchants, sailors, lawyers, and a few others, men who seem out of place in their plain Quaker clothing. These are abolitionists, and they're here because they've heard whispers about this case, heard that something extraordinary happened on a ship called the Zong. The Lord Chief Justice is William Murray, 1st Earl of Mansfield. He's an old man now, experienced, learned, personally opposed to slavery, but bound by the law to uphold the property rights of slave owners. This case will be one of the most difficult of his long career. The lawyer for the ship's owners is a Mr. Hayward, a successful commercial lawyer with a reputation for winning difficult cases. He's well-dressed, well-spoken, confident. He stands before the bench and begins his argument. My lords, this case is quite straightforward. It concerns a matter of maritime law that has been well established for centuries. When cargo must be jettisoned to save a ship, the loss falls upon the insurers, not the ship's owners. This is the principle of general average, and it has been applied consistently in British law since before any of us were born. He pauses, letting his words settle over the courtroom. The facts of this case are simple. The Zong encountered difficulties during her voyage from Africa to Jamaica. Due to navigational errors, the ship sailed off course and was delayed. Water supplies ran critically low. The captain, the late Captain Collingwood, acting in accordance with his duty to preserve the ship and as much of her cargo as possible, made the difficult decision to jettison those slaves who were dying of disease and who were consuming precious water that was needed for the survival of the rest. One of the judges interrupts. Counselor, you speak of cargo, but we are talking about people, human beings. Indeed, my lord, Haywood acknowledges smoothly, but in law, they are cargo, they are property. The question before this court is not a moral one but a legal one. Were the ship's owners justified under maritime law in jettisoning cargo to save the ship? According to every precedent I have found, the answer is yes. 132 people, the judge persists. That is a significant number. It is, my lord. And it speaks to the severity of the crisis faced by the captain. He would not have taken such drastic action if the situation were not dire. The ship's logs, which I will enter into evidence, clearly show that water was critically short, that disease was spreading rapidly among the cargo, and that the captain had every reason to believe that without action the entire ship would be lost. The lawyer for the insurers, Mr. Davenport, is an older man, grey-haired, with the bearing of someone who's spent decades fighting battles in courtrooms. He rises to respond. My lords, he begins, my learned friend would have you believe this is a simple case of jettison under maritime law. But let us examine the facts more closely, shall we? He picks up a document from his table. The Zong left the coast of Africa with sufficient water for the voyage. This is documented. The water shortage was caused by navigational errors made by Captain Collingwood, who, we must note, had no experience commanding a slave ship. Should the insurers be held liable for the incompetence of the captain? Moreover, he continues, warming to his argument, and this is crucial, my lords, the evidence shows that after the first group of slaves was thrown overboard on November 29th, it rained. It rained heavily enough to fill the ship's water barrels. There was no longer any shortage of water, and yet, despite this, the captain ordered the jettison to continue. On December 1st and December 2nd, another 78 people were thrown overboard, even though there was no longer any water shortage. The courtroom erupts in murmurs. This is the first time many people are hearing the full details of what happened on the Zong. Davenport raises his voice over the noise. How, my lords, can this possibly be justified as necessary jettison when there was no longer any shortage of water? This was not about saving the ship. This was about profit. This was about turning a loss into a gain through insurance fraud. Haywood jumps to his feet. My lords, the selections were made before the rain based on the conditions at the time. The captain was following through on a decision already made, a decision based on his best judgment of the conditions facing his ship. His best judgment? Davenport's voice drips with contempt. My lords, let me present testimony from members of the crew. He calls James Kelsall to the stand. Kelsall is nervous, sweating despite the cool March air. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want to relive any of this. But he's been compelled to testify. Mr. Kelsall, Davenport begins, you were the first mate on the Zong, were you not? Yes, sir. And you were present for the jettison of the slaves? Yes, sir. Please tell the court about the water situation on the ship. Kelsall swallows hard. The water was running low. We had been at sea longer than expected due to navigational errors. We were rationing strictly. How low was it? We estimated we had about 10 days of water left, perhaps 12 with strict rationing. And how far were you from Jamaica? 2 weeks, possibly more depending on the winds. So there was a shortage. Now tell the court about November 30th, The day after the first jettison, what happened? It rained. How much? A great deal, enough to fill our water barrels. So the water shortage was resolved? Yes, sir. And yet the jettison continued. Kelsall is silent for a long moment. Yes, sir. Why? If there was no longer a water shortage, why did the captain order more slaves to be thrown overboard? The captain said, he said the selections had already been made, that those who were sick, who were dying, should still be jettisoned. But the reason for jettison was the water shortage. Once that was resolved, why continue? Kelsall looks down at his hands. I don't know, sir. Those were the captain's orders. Davenport lets the silence stretch, lets the implications settle over the courtroom. Then he asks one more question. Mr. Kelsall, in your honest opinion, was it necessary to throw 132 people overboard to save the ship? Kelsall's voice is barely a whisper. No, sir. I don't believe it was necessary. The courtroom explodes. People are shouting questions, exclaiming, arguing. Lord Mansfield has to call for order multiple times before the noise dies down. Haywood stands for cross-examination, but he's on the defensive now. Mr. Kelsall, you followed the captain's orders, did you not? Yes, sir. You believed at the time that the jettison was necessary? Why, yes, sir, at the time. And if you had refused, you would have been charged with mutiny. Yes, sir. So you were simply following orders, doing your duty as an officer on the ship? Yes, sir. But the damage is done. The court has heard, directly from a participant, that the jettison was not necessary, that it continued even after the water shortage was resolved. Davenport calls another witness, a sailor named William who also served on the Zong. William is more forthcoming than Kelsall, more willing to describe the full horror of what happened. It was murder, plain and simple, William says. I know the captain called it jettison. I know he cited maritime law, but we all knew what it really was. We were throwing living people into the sea, people who were begging for their lives, people who were fighting to survive, and we did it for insurance money. How do you know it was for insurance money? Haywood interrupts. Because the captain said so, William responds. He said if they died of natural causes, the loss fell on the owners. But if they were jettisoned, the insurers would pay. He said it explicitly. This was about converting a loss into a profit. The trial continues for days. More witnesses are called. The ship's logs are examined. Expert testimony is given about water supplies and navigational errors. The full horror of the Zong is laid bare before the court. And sitting in the gallery, taking notes on everything, is a man named Granville Sharp. Sharp is a civil servant, a musician, a scholar, and most importantly, one of Britain's most passionate abolitionists. He's already successfully defended several enslaved people in British courts, establishing the principle that slavery is not legal on English soil. Now he's watching this trial with growing outrage. When the court breaks for the day, Sharp approaches some of the other abolitionists in the gallery. They gather in a nearby coffee house, and Sharp is furious. Did you hear that? He demands. Did you hear what they're arguing about? Not whether murder was committed, not whether 132 people were wrongly killed, but who should pay, the owners or the insurers, as if that's the only question that matters. A Quaker woman named Anne speaks up. What can we do, Granville? We're not parties to the case. We have no standing. We can make sure the world knows, Sharp says intensely. We can make sure this doesn't just disappear into legal precedent. We can tell the story, spread it far and wide, make sure everyone in Britain knows what happened on the Zong. They won't care, another man says pessimistically. People don't care about the suffering of Africans. They care about sugar and rum and profit. Then we make them care, Sharp insists. We make them see that this is what slavery is. This is what it leads to. People being thrown overboard like garbage. Children being drowned for insurance money. This is the logical conclusion of treating humans as property. And so Sharp begins his campaign. He goes to the newspapers. He writes letters. He gives speeches. He contacts every abolitionist, every sympathetic politician, every minister who might be willing to listen. He makes sure that the story of the Zong becomes impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the trial concludes. The jury deliberates and returns a verdict in favor of the ship's owners. The insurers must pay. Lord Mansfield, delivering the ruling, is clearly uncomfortable. He makes it clear that he's bound by precedent, by the law as it exists, not as he might wish it to be. This court, he says, finds that under maritime law, the jettison of cargo to save a ship is covered by insurance. The evidence shows that the captain believed at the time he gave the orders that such action was necessary. Whether he was correct in that belief is not for this court to determine. We are not here to second-guess the judgment of ship's captains in crisis situations. However, he adds, and here his voice takes on a different tone, this court notes with deep concern the circumstances of this case. The loss of 132 lives is a tragedy that cannot be dismissed lightly. While this court is bound by the law as it stands, it is the opinion of this court that Parliament should examine the question of whether the current law is adequate to address such situations. It's a carefully worded suggestion that the law needs to change. It's not much, but it's something. But Sharp won't let it rest there. He files a motion for a new trial citing evidence of fraud. He argues that the jettison was not necessary, that it was done purely for profit, and that therefore it should not be covered by insurance. The motion is granted. A new hearing is scheduled for May 1783. This time, Sharp is ready. He's gathered more evidence, interviewed more crew members, documented every inconsistency in the owner's story. The hearing is held before Lord Mansfield again, and this time, the evidence against the owners is overwhelming. Kelsall is called again. This time, with Sharp's withering stare from the gallery, his testimony is more honest, more complete. The truth is, Kelsall says quietly, his voice breaking, the truth is, we had water. After the rain, we had enough. More than enough, but the captain, Captain Collingwood, was not well. The fever had him. He wasn't thinking clearly, and I should have stopped him. I should have refused, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Sharp calls out from the gallery, ignoring the rules against spectators speaking. Lord Mansfield should reprimand him, but instead he nods to Kelsall. Answer the question. Afraid of being blamed, Kelsall says. Afraid of mutiny charges. Afraid of losing my position. Afraid of what would happen if we arrived in Jamaica with most of the cargo dead from disease. I thought if we could call it jettison, if we could say it was necessary, then we'd be protected. The insurers would pay, and we'd be blameless. So you murdered 132 people to protect your career. Sharp's voice is harsh, accusatory. Yes, Kelsall whispers. God help me, yes. That's exactly what I did. The courtroom is silent. Even Lord Mansfield seems shaken. But here's the thing about the British legal system in 1783. It's designed to protect property rights, including the right to own enslaved people, and while individuals can be condemned, while consciences can be troubled, the system itself is not ready to fundamentally change. Lord Mansfield rules that a new trial should be held, that there's evidence of fraud that needs to be examined more thoroughly. But the new trial never actually happens. The insurers and the owners settle out of court. The insurers agree to pay a portion of the claim, and both sides agree to drop the case. They want it to go away. They want the questions it raises about slavery, about human property, about the fundamental morality of their economic system, to go away. But Sharp won't let it go away. Now that he has the full story, now that he has testimony from crew members, now that he has all the details, he launches a public campaign that will help change history. He writes a pamphlet called The Law of Retribution, or a serious warning to Great Britain and her colonies. In it, he lays out the full story of the Zong. He names names. He describes in graphic detail what happened on those 3 days in November and December of 1781, and he argues that this is what slavery is, that this is the inevitable result of treating humans as property. The pamphlet spreads across Britain. It's read in churches, in coffee houses, in Parliament. People who never thought much about slavery, who enjoyed their sugar in their tea without considering where it came from, suddenly cannot ignore the reality. A poet named William Cowper, deeply moved by the story, writes verses about the Zong. They're published in newspapers across Britain. I own I am shocked at the purchase of slaves, and fear those who buy them and sell them are knaves. What I hear of their hardships, their tortures, and groans, is almost enough to draw pity from stones. I pity them greatly, but I must be mum, for how could we do without sugar and rum, especially sugar, so needful we see. What? Give up our desserts, our coffee and tea? The sarcasm is biting, the message clear. British comfort is built on African suffering. The sugar in your tea is sweetened with blood. Other abolitionists take up the cause. Thomas Clarkson, a young Cambridge graduate who's recently become passionate about abolition, begins collecting evidence about the slave trade. He interviews sailors in every port, documenting the horrors they've witnessed. The Zong is always his prime example, his proof that slavery is fundamentally evil. Clarkson creates a diagram, a technical drawing showing how enslaved people are packed into slave ships. It shows human bodies arranged like cargo with measurements and calculations about how many can fit in a given space. The image spreads across Britain, appearing in pamphlets and newspapers. People who could ignore words cannot ignore the visual reality of what slavery means. William Wilberforce, a young member of Parliament and friend of Prime Minister William Pitt, is moved by the Zong story to take up the cause of abolition in Parliament. His first speech on the subject, in 1789, references the Zong explicitly. "Honourable members," he says, standing before the House of Commons, "you have heard arguments about economics, about the rights of property, about the disruption that abolition would cause to our trade. But I ask you to remember a ship called the Zong. I ask you to remember that on that ship, in the year 1781, 132 people, 132 souls created in God's image, were thrown into the sea like refuse. And our courts," he continues, his voice rising with passion, "our courts debated not whether this was murder, but who should pay for the lost property, not whether it was right, but whether it was legal. This is what slavery does. It reduces humans to property. It makes monsters of good men. It corrupts every institution it touches, including our courts and our laws." A member of the opposition stands. The honourable member speaks of the Zong as if it were typical, but surely it was an isolated incident, an aberration caused by an incompetent captain and unfortunate circumstances. Isolated, Wilberforce's voice is sharp. How many similar incidents never came to light because there was no insurance claim to bring them to court? How many thousands have died in the Middle Passage, not thrown overboard for insurance, but dying of disease, of maltreatment, of despair? The Middle Passage has a mortality rate of 10 to 20%. That means that in the decades since the Zong, tens of thousands of Africans have died in the crossing, tens of thousands, and we call the Zong isolated. The debates rage for years. The slave trade is too profitable, too deeply embedded in British commerce, for abolition to come quickly. But the Zong remains a constant reference point, a story that abolitionists return to again and again. In 1787, the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade is founded. The Zong is part of their founding documents, part of their argument for why the trade must end. They commission an investigation into the slave trade, gathering evidence from hundreds of sources. The Zong is always prominent in their materials. Thomas Clarkson travels thousands of miles, visiting every major port in Britain, interviewing sailors, collecting evidence. In Liverpool, he finds Thomas, the young sailor who was 17 during the Zong voyage. Thomas is now in his 20s, working on the docks, still haunted by what he experienced. Clarkson finds him in a tavern drinking away memories that won't fade. When Clarkson introduces himself, explains what he's doing, Thomas initially refuses to talk. "I can't," Thomas says. "I can't relive it. I can't talk about it. Leave me alone." But Clarkson persists. "If you don't talk about it, if people like you don't tell the truth about what happens on these ships, then nothing will ever change. The trade will continue. More ships like the Zong will sail. More people will die." Finally, Thomas agrees. Over several hours, with Clarkson taking notes, Thomas tells the full story. He describes the conditions in the hold, the sickness, the desperation. He describes the selections, the screaming, the begging. He describes throwing people overboard, the feeling of their bodies struggling in his hands, their desperate will to live. "I see their faces every night," Thomas says. tears streaming down his face. Every night when I close my eyes, I see them. The woman who sang as she fell, the child who begged in broken English, the man who jumped himself rather than let us throw him. I hear their screams. I hear them calling out in languages I don't understand, but I know what they're saying. They're saying please. They're saying I want to live. They're saying I have children. I have a mother. I have people who love me. Please don't do this. I was 17, he continues. I needed the work, my family was poor, and I became a murderer. I helped kill 132 people. How do you live with that? How do you go on knowing what you've done? By telling the truth, Clarkson says gently. By making sure their deaths weren't meaningless. By helping to end the trade that made the Zong possible. Thomas nods slowly. Then use my story. Tell people what I told you. Maybe it will help. Maybe it will matter. Clarkson's account of his conversation with Thomas becomes part of his massive evidence compilation. It's read in Parliament, published in pamphlets, spread across Britain. The personal testimony of someone who was there, who participated, gives the story an immediacy that statistics and legal arguments cannot match. But change comes slowly. The first major victory doesn't come until 1807, 26 years after the Zong, when the Slave Trade Act is passed, abolishing the British slave trade. British ships can no longer transport enslaved people from Africa, but slavery itself continues in British colonies for another 26 years. The Slavery Abolition Act finally passes in 1833, freeing enslaved people throughout most of the British Empire. It's 52 years after the Zong, 2 generations. Most of the people who were there, who witnessed it, who participated in it, are dead by then. But the story lives on. Because here's the thing about the Zong. It wasn't unique. It wasn't the worst thing that happened during the slave trade. It was just the one that got documented, the one that went to court, the one that couldn't be hidden or forgotten. How many other ships threw people overboard and simply didn't report it? How many captains made similar calculations and left no records? How many thousands of Africans died in ways that were just as horrific but that left no trace in history? We'll never know. The Zong is the one we know about. These 132 people whose names we don't know, whose stories we'll never fully understand, are the ones we remember because their deaths became public, became a legal case, became a cause. But they stand for all the others. All the nameless victims of the Middle Passage, all the people who died in the holds of slave ships, in the horror of the crossing, all the people who were stolen from their homes, their families, their lives, and reduced to property, to cargo, to things. The Zong matters because it shows us what slavery really was. Not some abstract economic system, not a regrettable but necessary evil, but a horror that turned humans into cargo and murder into a business decision. Let me tell you about one more person in this story. A woman named Elizabeth Hayrick, a Quaker abolitionist who was in that coffee house with Granville Sharp after the trial. She went home that night and couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about those 132 people, kept wondering who they were, what they might have become if they'd been allowed to live. She started writing. Not arguments, not legal briefs, but something else. She imagined the lives of the victims. She gave them names, histories, dreams. She wrote about a mother named Alma, who cared for children in the hold, who sang to them even as she was dying of fever, who was thrown into the sea still reaching for the child she'd been caring for. She wrote about a trader named Kofi, who spoke 3 languages, who had a wife and 4 children, who thought his connections to Europeans would protect him, who learned too late that no one was safe, who jumped to his death rather than be thrown, who called out his name so someone would remember he existed. She wrote about an old woman named Abena who had 3 children who died in chains and whose body was thrown overboard with no ceremony, no prayer, no acknowledgement that she had ever lived. Elizabeth's stories weren't strictly factual. She made up the details, imagined the inner lives of people she'd never met, but in doing so she did something important. She reminded people that these weren't just statistics, weren't just 132 slaves. They were people. They had names. They had lives. They had families who missed them, dreams that would never be realized, potential that was destroyed for profit. Her pamphlet, Voices from the Zong, was controversial. Some abolitionists thought she was being too emotional, too sentimental. They wanted to focus on legal arguments, economic analyses, rational debate. But Elizabeth understood something important. People respond to stories, not statistics. People care about individuals, not numbers. Her pamphlet spread across Britain, often alongside Clarkson's technical evidence and Wilberforce's parliamentary speeches. Together, they created a multifaceted campaign that eventually helped bring down the entire system of slavery. But it took decades, and in those decades, millions more Africans were enslaved, transported, bought, and sold. Millions more suffered and died. The Zong helped start a movement, but it couldn't end the horror quickly. Today, the Zong is remembered. There are memorials, historical markers, educational programs. The story is taught in schools as a crucial moment in the abolition movement. Scholars have written books analyzing every aspect of the case, from the legal precedents to the social context to the personal stories of those involved. But here's what we don't have: the names of the 132 people who died. We know they existed. We know some were men, some women, some children. We know some were healthy, some sick. We know some fought, and some went quietly. But their names, their specific stories, their individual identities are lost to history. They're memorialized collectively as the victims of the Zong, but not individually. And that's a tragedy in itself, because every one of them was a person with a unique life, a unique story, a unique value. So when we remember the Zong, we're remembering not just 132 people, but all the unnamed, unknown victims of slavery. All the people who were stolen, transported, enslaved, and died without anyone recording their names or their stories. We're remembering that behind every statistic is a person. Behind the economic data about the slave trade, the millions of people transported, the percentages who died in the crossing, are individual human beings who loved and hoped and dreamed and suffered and died. The Zong matters because it shows us the true face of slavery, not the sanitized version that some people want to teach, not the economic abstraction that some people want to remember, but the brutal, horrific reality. 132 people thrown overboard for insurance money. 132 murders disguised as jettison. 132 lives ended because profit mattered more than humanity. And when the case went to court, the question wasn't whether it was wrong. The question was who should pay. That's what slavery did. It made murder a matter of insurance law, not morality. It made people into property, lives into ledger entries, human suffering into business calculations. Remember the Zong. Remember those 132 souls. Remember what was done to them. Remember that it was wrong is wrong will always be wrong. Remember that systems that treat humans as property will always eventually lead to horrors like this. Remember the Zong. Remember them all.